Hey church, just want to say I really miss all of you, and I really look forward to being able to see you all again here hopefully soon. Today we're continuing in Galatians and coming to Galatians chapter 5, and so just want to share a bit about what encourages me in Galatians 5, and just share some of my thoughts on that. So, I think coming into Galatians 5, it's helpful to really kind of think back to Galatians 4. All throughout this book, Paul is addressing the Galatians' misunderstanding of what the gospel is, driving home that this gospel is through faith. It's not through the works of the law. And really, I think in chapter 4, Paul gives us just a helpful reality. It's an image, but it's also a reality that we're adopted. We're adopted sons and daughters. And so just to go back to Galatians 4, in verse 4, Paul says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." And so I think as we move forward into chapter 5, just keeping that in mind, I think it really helps us kind of see what Paul is getting at here. And then as chapter 4 ends, he's saying you're adopted and you're free. You are a son and daughter of the free woman. And so right away then in chapter 5 and verse 1, he says, "For freedom, Christ has set you free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." And so we should ask, what was slavery? If we continue to read, we realize the slavery that he's talking about is just this slavery to the law, that thinking that by keeping the law, by obeying the law, that through that somehow we are justified. And again, that's where it's helpful, I think, to remember chapter 4. If you think about yourself as an adopted son, an adopted daughter, the thought of working to earn that adoption is foolish. I think you could look at any parent who has adopted a child. They didn't adopt them because they were the cutest or they were the smartest. I think you could maybe find some that do that, but the beauty of that imagery is that this was a child who's lost, who doesn't have parents, and parents come and adopt that child, and that's what we've received. We were not perfect kids, and in fact, Paul lays out clearly, we were dead in our sin, and so remembering that, I think, is really helpful, because he's saying to these people who are holding up circumcision, again in verse 3, he says, "I testify again to every man who accepts circumcision that he is obligated to keep the whole law." And so for 10 minutes of looking at the law, we would all realize that we don't do that. We don't perfectly keep up the law. And that's why Jesus had to come. That's why Jesus had to come. He had to live perfectly on our behalf, and he's done that. And through faith, we've received his righteousness. And so, Paul wants us to think of ourselves this way. And I think it's helpful to see, I think as we walk in the Christian life, that is just a subtle thing that we are constantly needing to remind ourselves of who we are. I think it's thinking of Paul driving that we should think of ourselves this way. In verse 7, he says, "You are running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth?" In verse 8, "This persuasion is not from him who calls you." So again, that persuasion being this like a way of thinking. Verse 9, he continues, "A little leaven's the whole lump." And then 10, "I have confidence in the Lord that you will take no other view." So again, this way of thinking. And so we have to think of ourselves as adopted, think of the mercy of God, not that we earn, this salvation. God has been gracious to us, and we must remember that it's through faith that we are reconciled to him. So then I think what that brings us to, in verse 13 is kind of another ditch that we can fall into. Paul says, "For you are called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another." I think the phrase that kind of came to my mind is like, we can think of ourselves as, these adopted sons and daughters. And I think a temptation that could also creep in is thinking that, Christ did it all for me. All I need to do is have faith and I'm covered. And so thinking that we somehow can kind of sit back and relax and the man upstairs is going to take care of me. That's not the gospel either. And the kind of phrase that being kind of like a spiritual trust fund baby that just thinks that, oh, daddy's going to write the check, spiritually speaking, and I can just sit here. And Paul's saying absolutely not. We're free. Well, what are we free to? If God is who he says he is, and he is worthy of all praise, he's worthy of all honor, and he's given us all of this. He's given us gifts and skills. He's given us relationships, friends and family, neighbors. He's given that so that we can serve him, so that we can work out these skills and abilities through serving and loving our friends and our family. And so Paul says to do that. In verse 14, the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbors as yourself. So love. So you're free, Christian, but you're free to do what you're meant to do, not what you want to do. And what you're meant to do is to glorify God, enjoy him, love and serve those around you. And so that's just helpful for me to just remember, no, it's not by the law. I could never earn my adoption with God. He has adopted me, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm free. I'm free from my selfish desires. I'm free from trying to do the things that I'm commanded to for the sake of earning. I can just freely do it and glorify God and bless and love my friends and family as I do that. And I think, from verse 16 through 25, just encourage that God is so abundant and he helps us. And he gives us his Spirit to do this. He gives us his Spirit to both remember, but also to do. Paul says, I say, walk by the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. So even just think about that. Like, we can do that. If we are free, we truly are free. We are free to walk by the Spirit. And if we walk by the Spirit, we're promised that we won't gratify the desires of the flesh. So there's encouragement there. Fast forwarding down to verse 25, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. So I think just keeping in mind, like, if I'm free to do the things that Paul lays out. All right, there is a Spirit that will help me, that gives me life, and that will keep me in step so that I can bear the fruit of the Spirit, which is what I want to do. So just kind of in summary, I think helped here, remembering my adoption, remembering that it's not by the works of the law. It's foolishness, it's futile to think that I could somehow earn my standing or pay back my sin to God. But also just warned, Haakon, you're not free to be lazy. You're not free to sit back, nor would you want to. You want to glorify me, God says, and I will give you the resources to do that. And so I'm grateful for a God who adopts us. I'm grateful for a God who knows our temptation, reminds us of what we will be tempted to think of ourselves, and who graciously supplies all that we need to love and serve him. So let's pursue that together. And just want to say again, I miss each and every one of you, just being around you, hearing you sing on Sundays. I'm grateful for the gospel that brings us all together, and grateful for an opportunity to share a little bit about what I'm seeing here in Galatians. So God bless you. I look forward to seeing you soon.